All right, welcome back. So I've fixed that tile map there. It was just some collision shapes that were off a little bit, so there was little gaps and the player could fall down and hit the edge of other tiles. But that's fixed. Now there's last time we left with the riding on the enemy's head, which is not something we want to do. I also noticed as I was playing a little problem, and you're bound to come into something like this as well as we start getting and playing with collision shape or collision layers, because they can get a little complicated and it's very easy to forget things. So as I play through here, I go up. Now I notice that I hit the flag and nothing happens. And that's because I did not set collision layer for my flag. So once you introduce them and you start playing around with collision layers, um, it's it's something you really want to try and set up at the beginning of your game rather than later on. But it's a bit of a confusing idea, which is why I didn't do it at the beginning. But we have a goal. If I go to my goal scene now, let's make sure that that goal gets put into its layer as well. And that is and be careful here, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the goal is in the, hover over you, come on you. Oh, I'm frozen here. Oh, I got the game going in the background. There we go. The goal should be in the collectibles layer, like so. And then we will want to make sure that the player is also interacting, is masked to collectibles so that they can hit each other and interact there. So let's see. If I go back to my level 1 now, always do a little test and a debug to make sure. But it's really easy if you've already built a bunch of things to forget which one needs to go where or which needs to interact with which. So it's kind of thing that as you start now making new objects, think about what layer they go into. And we are not having that work there. Because the player needs to interact with the collectible. But in this case, also the collectible, because the script is on the collectible, it needs to interact with the player. So let's make sure that the collectible, that the goal here, because the goal's got its own script, we want to make sure that it masks to the player as well. We don't really need it to interact with the world, but let's make sure that the collectible hits the player and the player hits the collectibles later on. This is actually more important for this one because the movement script is on that goal. So let's try level 1 again. And just so you can see some of the debugging process in one of these videos, wanted to show you here, even though the point of this one is to look at the player hitting the enemy. There we go. Now we are interacting with our flag. Just do a little debugging, do a little bit of thinking. The layers concepts and the masking concept can get a little confusing. Make sure that the right thing's hitting the other right thing. So the enemy, speaking of some collision masks here, the enemy is currently something that I just ride on, and that's to be expected because it's just a character body. It's a physics body that when I hit it, I just move along there. And I am wanting to interact with this enemy, so that does make sense. However, I don't want to ride on its head. I want usually the enemy to do something to me, to take a life, to restart it. So if you think about it, the enemy actually can function a little bit like the fall zone. When I hit the enemy, it can restart the game at the moment because I haven't got lives or health or anything like that. So I'm going to steal some of that idea and apply it to the enemy. But of course, the enemy is a character body. It doesn't interact with other things the same way as, say, an Area 2D would. But there's nothing to stop me from adding to the enemy an Area 2D. And I will call this the Hitbox here. And to that I'm going to add a collision shape. So essentially, I've got like a fall zone that's a collision shape. It's like a fall zone that's going to follow me around, and I can have multiple ones on the player. And in fact, in this case, I want the hitbox to be just slightly larger than the collision shape, I should say, of the hitbox to be slightly larger than the collision shape of the enemy, because the collision shape of the enemy is really telling me where is the solid part outside this enemy, what's going to be hitting walls and turning around. But here now, if this enemy hits the player at all, it's not going to fall on top like right now. If I had this set up like this collision shape here, which is the hitbox shape, if I had set up like that, then the enemy could land on top and just stand on my head, which may be something I want to do. Or I want to even have a third hitbox here so that kind of like in Mario, I could jump on top of the player and say squish him. But if I hit him from the side, then he's going to damage me. So these collision shapes, you can have multiple ones, and because they're nodes, you can kind of click them together like Lego pieces. In this case, I want to say if you touch the enemy at all, it's going to restart like so. So at the moment, we've got this ability to have a hitbox, and we can do something with it. In this case, I am going to restart when the player hits the hitbox. So let's go have a little look at how to do that. And it's just like the fall zone. I am going to click on this area 2D, and I'm going to say when a body enters, I'm going to send it back to a script. I already have an enemy script, so I don't need to attach a new script here. So I'm going to connect it right up there. And I'm going to do just like I did before, get tree, period, reload current scene. So when a body hits this, then we're going to reload it, and let's see what happens when I play this. Play this game. Oh, we should make sure we're in level 1 here. Oh, and you run into some problems. So I'm just seeing, it looks like I'm kind of floating here. I can move somehow, but some really strange things are happening. And if you think about it, I can figure out the reason why. The enemy is right here, and it's bumping into and hitting. In this case, it looks like it's hitting the floor here. I could move that enemy up a little bit there. But it says when a body hits the when the area 2D hits a body, it's going to reload the current scene. And there is physics bodies all over this enemy. There's a physics body at the floor here. Think about it when it hits this bumper. That's also a physics body. So we are running into some problems because it's going to collide with all sorts of things and keep reloading the game. And really, I only want it to do that when it's hitting the player. So there's two ways of doing this, and I'm going to introduce a new way just so you've got multiple options in your toolkit. The first way, which you already know about, would be to say, let's check out the hitbox. We could make it a separate collision layer and say, well, this collision layer can only interact with the player. So we kind of do the opposite of what we did with the bumpers. That would be one way of doing it, but I want to look at a new way as well, um, because we can have the body hit this. We have a body that hits this hitbox, and I only want it to be the player. And since this is very specific, there's only one player ever, and it's always called player, I can use another technique. So right now, I am always reloading the scene whenever any body hits the hitbox, but I can also throw in an if statement here. And the body that hit this hitbox is actually sent as a variable to this script. And you can see this is where this body comes in here. So if it's a wall, then the body would be equal to wall. And if it was a player, then the body would be equal to player. And if it's the floor, the tile map, then the body would be equal to the tile map. Whatever thing hit this is stored temporarily as body. And I can use that as a variable in this function. So I can say if the body, and that is the whole node, the whole object comes in, but I can talk about the name of the body. And in this case, I want to know if the name of that body is equal to player, because that's what I called my body. Now notice I've used two equal signs here, and this is something we might not have covered yet. Notice here when I said velocity.x equals move speed, what I'm doing is saying I'm taking move speed and putting it, I'm making velocity.x equal to that. But in this case, if I were to say body.name equals player, well, what that's actually saying is take the word player and put it into the name of the body. And I don't want to do that. I want to see if these things are equal or compared. And unfortunately, computers don't like it when the same thing has two different meanings. In this case, I'm doing what's called assigning. I'm making an assignment operator, which means I say this becomes this. And in fact, we often in programming don't use the word equals. We say velocity.x gets move speed. It becomes move speed. Because equals, I'm testing for equality. I am checking. And so what we actually do is we use the double equal sign as a comparison operator. This is, I'm comparing player to that. Are these two things the same? Are they equal? And if they are, if the body that just hit me is equal to player, the name of it is equal to player, then and only then am I going to reload the current scene. And that is just another way of doing something similar to those different layers. But when you have one player, it makes it a little bit easier. You'll notice my game is now playing and I'm not restarting. So indeed, that enemy is hitting a body, but it looks at it and says, is that body called player? No, I'm going to ignore this and turn around. However, now, if the player is in the way and I hit, then nothing's happening. Interesting. Let's figure out why that's the case. Double check the enemy, and what I'm going to test is, did I do something weird with the layers? I did, because notice the hitbox does have its own layers as well. And they are currently different than the enemy layers. So I'm going to make them the same. I guess I'm actually doing what I did before, and that's going to interact with the player. Let's double check here. It's in layer 4 and it's got those first 3. So it's going to be in layer 4 and it's got those first 3. Let's make sure now that that works. So I want to make sure that the hitbox has the same collision layers as the enemy does, so that it has the same kind of interactions with the player. Boom, there we go. And the player now hits the enemy and restarts. I can do it from above, and there's no longer any kind of walking on top of the head. As soon as I hit that, it triggers a reload, making this game now a little more challenging to play.